Greetings, this is Charles Darwin. Okay, I'm not doing a very good job of convincing you that I'm macho, but let's consider today the possibility, which may be held by many or most creationists, that Adam was a very, very macho man. Now, in a previous video that I did about Darwin smelling a dirty sock, a listener posted a comment, and I want to thank that listener for it because it was a very insightful comment saying that perhaps some creationists believed, as I said, that the devil had created pseudogenes, but more likely creationists believe, most of them, that Adam had all of those genes, and that since the time of Adam, the human race has degenerated and lost the use of those genes. That is, Adam had all those genes, used them, and we do not have them today. Today they are pseudogenes, as part of the degeneration rather than the forward evolution of the human species. Well, I want to examine this possibility. Pseudogenes as degenerate versions of what Adam had. Now this is actually a testable hypothesis. I do not know that any creationists are willing to test it, but it can be done, because you can get DNA from very old archaeological specimens. I just read in Science recently that the oldest human DNA is from a specimen 45,000 years old, found in Siberia. Now, of course, creationists don't believe that it really is 45,000 years old, but at least it is far back in time, further back in time than today, so you could test the hypothesis that that human DNA had fewer pseudogenes and more genes than humans do today. But I don't know that they're willing to make that test. But perhaps more interestingly, let's consider what are some of these genes. That might tell us a little bit of what Adam was like. Well, let's consider the genes that I talked about last time, that is the olfactory pseudogenes. Perhaps if Adam had all 1,000 of those olfactory genes, perhaps he had the kind of scent capabilities that a dog has or a mouse has. Maybe Adam really could sniff his way through the Garden of Eden and find his way and interpret the scent environment just the way he could the environment of vision and of hearing. That's an interesting idea, Adam sniffing things out like a dog. Well, there's another pseudogene that we have and don't use in modern humans, and that is GULO. That stands for L-gluconolactone oxidase, and that is an enzyme that produces vitamin C. Now, if Adam had that gene, what that would mean is that the Garden of Eden was full of fruits that had vitamin C, but he did not need vitamin C because he could produce them himself. Now, many of the pseudogenes are related to metabolism in various ways, and we cannot find a single effect that those genes have. It turns out, however, that about half of our genes are metabolic genes that have some effect on human intelligence. So it could be, even though these are not strictly speaking brain genes, it could be that because of those genes, Adam was of immense intelligence, the kind of intelligence that we could even not imagine today. There are about 1.5 million species that are known today, and since creationists believe that at the time of Adam there had not yet been any extinctions, there might have been 100 million species. And the book of Genesis says that Adam named all of the animals. Well, let's suppose that there may have been, maybe of that 100 million species, maybe 25 million species of animals. And Adam named them. Well, maybe, as a matter of fact, he could name all of them and remember the names. That's a possibility. He also had to have an incredible immune system, because some of these pseudogenes are in fact related to the human immune system. There's another pseudogene for theta-defensin, which is an antimicrobial compound that is effective against both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. We have the pseudogene, we do not express the gene. Now it's interesting that some of the pseudogenes are related to the immune system and to the production of antimicrobial proteins, because at the time of the Garden of Eden, creationists say there were no diseases. So why would he have had them? Never mind, he had them. He was a walking defense against disease that had not yet come into existence. Another gene that we have as a pseudogene that he would have had, Adam would have had as a gene, is the gene for chymosin, otherwise known as rennet. And this is the protein that causes cheese to curdle, or milk to curdle in order to make cheese. And today, cheesemakers, at least traditional cheesemakers, have to get rid of it from the stomach lining of young cows. I know that when you eat cheese, you don't usually think about that, but you see, Adam wouldn't have had to do that. He wouldn't have had to make cheese. He just drinks milk, and it turns into cheese in his stomach. Of course, he couldn't taste it then, but, well, now we're starting to really get a picture. Now, it gets better. Several genes, such as the TSSK pseudogenes, have to do with spermatogenesis. So perhaps Adam was a real hunk when it came to sperm production. That might have really impressed Eve. Of course, there were no other men in the world for her to compare him to, so she wouldn't have known what a hunk he was, but that's interesting to think about nevertheless. And then we can ask, what would Adam have looked like? One of these pseudogenes that we have as humans is HHAA, which is occasionally active in humans, though not in most humans. But when it is active, it causes people to have thick body hair, fur all over their bodies. Maybe then Adam had a thick coat of fur. That's interesting. And then there's the WNT3A gene, which is one of the genes that's responsible for the production of tails. Now, I'm not talking about pseudo-tails, when occasionally babies are born with protuberances at the end of the coccyx, but I'm talking about real tails. And occasionally babies are born with real tails that actually have muscles and cartilaginous vertebrae in them, and that they can actually move them. That does occasionally happen. So perhaps Adam had thick fur and a tail that he could wag. And of course he could sniff things out like a dog too. This is getting really interesting. Finally, of course, one of the mutations that humans have today is the inability to produce large amounts of melanin, so that would raise the near certainty that Adam would have had dark skin, at least the part of the skin that was not covered by thick, dark fur. So creationists would have to admit that white people are mutants. And they might be willing to do that. But you can see, this leaves us with quite an interesting portrait of what Adam would have looked like. He would have been a real hunk. He would have been really macho. Now, of course, all of this is pretty much imaginary, based upon the possible creationist supposition that all pseudogenes that we have in our bodies today used to be genes. Something to think about. This is Charles Darwin, tally ho, and amen.